You never be the woman he loves most? My fiancé's sister scoffed just before he walked down the aisle. My main priority will always be laughing and whispering. My fiancé said, You know, right. Grinning, I responded, Enjoy the wedding. Then I left and went into the limo carrying his greatest secret. I was going to get married last weekend, however. All was in place. The hotel on the plaza is six-figure marriage. A dress designed by Vera Wang. Hundreds of people are here, planning months of months. Thousands of little things examined and verified twice. Then I left. Not because I had cold feet. Not because I was uncertain. 10 minutes before I walked down the aisle, I realized the guy I was going to wed was a total joke. I fled. Starting from the beginning, lettuce. I had spent 4 years with my fiancé, Philip, met in New York, driven, aspirational, seeking the ideal life, both in finance. I assumed we had the same viewpoint. He seemed to be my person. I ought to have knew better. The first red warning sign is his sister, Amara. Her bounds were none at all, and when I say zero, she was nearly his second girlfriend. She would spend family get-togethers seated on his lap. She would playfully call herself the most significant lady in his life. Finding out I was living with him set her off. She would freely say things like, I don't believe Philip should ever get married. He's intended to be free. I initially convinced myself it was just a matter of an overprotective sister. Some families are just very unusually close. Once Philip and I were engaged, she would retreat. She skipped. She started to become worse, if anything. The second red warning sign is Philip never quite closed it down. He would dismiss it with laughter, say she was pulling a joke, tell me, whenever I felt uneasy, I was being too sensitive. We had plans, so even when I pointed out how unusual it was that his sister had a fuss when he called off dinner with her, he shrugged and said, That's just way she is. Looking back, it ought to be enough. Love, however, renders one dumb. Then there was the financial predicament. Philip had expensive taste, as I knew. Designer suits, elegant watches, first-class travel, exclusive clubs. Still, I felt he could afford it. We did work in finance, really. We were quite profitable. But something always felt strange. Like the moment his credit card was denied at Cipriani, he chuckled and said, Oops, I must have gone over my limit. Alternatively, the time we were going to divide the expense of a trip, and at last minute he begged me to credit my card. I will reimburse him, he advised. Never did he. I persuaded myself that was not really important. He could have been just poor at budgeting. Once, I even volunteered to assist him in organizing his money. He turned down my offer. The facts? Where his money was really coming from eluded me, until 2 weeks before the nuptials. I met Louis at a work function at the Met, a charitable gala. We started a conversation. I stated I shortly will be getting married. Who was my fiancé? He questioned. I reminded him. His facial expression altered right away. Bruce Philip? Philip uses last name. Me as well? Sure. Are you familiar with him? Brad chuckles. Really, I know him. Pulling up his phone, he browsed for a moment before showing me a photo. He had a selfie with Philip, floating on a yacht, at Ibiza. That was not the startling element. The surprising element is nestled on his lap was Philip. My tummy fell. I made myself keep my face neutral. Your knowledge of him is what? Brad gave a grin. He omitted telling you? We had been engaged for some time already. I felt like I may vomit up. Brad probably saw my expression as he left right away. Oh my God. You were unaware. I gave my head a shake. Then he had a very pained expression. Brad apparently has been supporting Philip's whole way of life for the previous 3 years. Rent is visit, travel, garments, fancy meals, all about. And Philip had encouraged him to believe as well. That I was okay with it. Wait, so you people are together? Still in great amazement, I asked. Brad mumbled. Not quite. Really, we have been nearer. But he gave it the impression of a plan. You were aboard. I was tremorous. 2 weeks before our marriage, I discovered my fiancé was a sugar baby for someone else, and he let me consider him as just a wealthy man with some poor spending decisions. Brad was furious, not at Philip or at me. He misled both of us, he said. That's lovely. I laughed, but I'm not sure why. Perhaps because it was so crazy that my brain just cannot digest it. Brad then said, What do you want to do about it? and ideas began to take shape. I closed my mouth. In the days before the wedding, I behaved absolutely normally. I let Philip believe I was happily ignorant. Let him strike a position for engagement photos. Let him go to his bachelor's celebration. Allow him to send me mushy messages about his inability to wait to spend his lifetime with me. Then, 5 minutes before the wedding, Amara entered the bridal suite. I ought to have anticipated it. She came up to me grinning, eyes full of triumph, and said, "You'll never be the woman he loves most. Always first will be my priority." Then behind her, Philip showed up, and he chuckled without shutting her down or advising her to quit being a lunatic third wheel in his love life. He grinned and gazed at me. "She's correct, you know," he then said. Though I'm not sure what those words meant, something in me clicked. There was never going to be change here. He never was going to give me priority. I would constantly be striving for a place in my own husband's life, even without the Brad scenario, or even after we were married. I was also done battling. I grinned thus. I turned Amara over her bouquet, and I murmured, "Savor the marriage." I turned back then, left the square, and into a waiting limo where Brad was waiting for me. The door softly clicked closed behind me. Unlike the intense July heat outside, the limo's air conditioning blasted across my skin. Brad sat opposite from me in a neat blue suit, one arm sloppily hanging over the bench. He spun a tumbler of whiskey in his palm, ice clinking gently. "That horrible, huh?" He raised an eyebrow and said. I let out a calm, under-control breath and felt the spike of adrenaline. Worse, Brad grinned and pointed to the champagne cooling in the ice bucket between us. "Drink?" I moved without thinking at all. I opened the bottle, let it froth over a little bit, then filled a full glass. Right now, my hands were steady. My pulse was slowing down. I left my own wedding just now. Still, it was still under progress. Brad drank his whiskey and observed me closely. What then should one do next? That was the thing I hadn't done yet. I wanted more than simply to walk away. I wanted to be sure Philip never forgot what he lost. I wanted him to inflict the kind of damage I do. I bent forward, fingers clutching the fragile glass stem. "How quickly can you wreck his life?" Brad chuckled. In the ballroom, anarchy was already underway. Nobody initially noticed I had disappeared. Still conversing, drinking champagne, guests were waiting for the ceremony to commence. Playing quiet classical music, the pianist, the organizer, hurried about performing last-minute inspections. The murmurs then began to emerge. "The bride is here? Is a delay evident? Why is Amara clutching her bouquet?" Standing close to the altar, Philip was speaking with his groomsmen, seeming unconcerned. One of the hotel crew then approached him. Clearing his voice, Sir asked the guy, "We have to talk about a billing-related urgent problem." Philip scowled. "Billing is, indeed. The primary card has had declining charges." Again and again. Philip laughed initially, believing it was a mistake. Then his demeanor shifted because Brad had already called. The suppliers were moving out in minutes. The catering company declined to provide yet another dish. The bar staff ceased dispensing beverages. Suddenly, she was rushing at Philip, demanding instant payment, while the assistant to the wedding planner muttered something in her ear. The music came to a halt then, dead quiet. Turning to Philip, the officiant, an old family friend, said, "Where's the bride?" And it was when he at last experienced terror. His ideal day and wedding were disintegrating right in front of him, and I left not even to see it burn. Brad's fingers over his phone screen moved quickly. "All right, everything in the plaza is closing down. Bartenders are not present. DJ's gathering their stuff. That should be enjoyable." I drank champagne, less than sufficient. Brad's gaze turned amusedly up to me. "You're merciless. You're just learning that?" Laughing. He every right. Still another is, my head racing, I slanted back into the leather seat. Then suddenly I had an idea. "He spent your money for everything, you said?" inquired. Brad agreed. "The apartment, the vehicle, the membership, it all. Take it back." Brad's smile became more broad. "Right now we are in discussion." He once again called. Philip's opulent condo, paid for by Brad, was no more his within minutes. The keys, revised, Porsches, on its way to being hauled. The credit cards? Frozen. Philip would have been homeless, destitute and embarrassed by the time he realized what was occurring. And I had not yet finished either. Then Brad heard his phone ringing. He looked at the TV, his face clouded. He pauses before responding. "What?" he said angrily. I studied his face very closely. His calm smile disappeared. His teeth closed tightly. Something felt off. "Are you absolutely clear?" inquired. A drawn-out silence he swore beneath his breath and hung back then. "Exactly what?" I queried. He gasped and massaged his jaw. "There is a problem here." A negative emotion crawled up my back. "Of what kind is this problem?" Brad stared back at me. Actually, Philip was grabbing money from other people as well. I went still. "Which?" Brad bent forward. Another guy walks in, more than what I cope with. Someone having actual authority, and he is seeking for Philip. I fixed him on her. "Whichever the heck we are referring about." Brad swept his hair with his hand. "Mario Russo." My gut started to turn around. Everybody living in Manhattan recognized that name. Russell was dangerous, not just wealthy. The sort of guy whose money accompanied unwritten regulations. The type of guy you did not just fool, and Philip had lied to him as well. Bradford shook his head. "Philip has no clue what is ahead if he thinks losing his wedding is horrible." I sighed slowly. This went beyond just getting retribution now. This was survival. Except for the faint buzz of the city outside, the limo was still now. Brad's ice clink occasionally sounded against his glass. I placed down my champagne, my fingers rather too firmly holding the stem. What exactly did Philip mislead Russell about? Brad ran a hand through his hair and breathed hard. I mean precisely as described here. Damon does not share my taste. He expects something in return, not just tosses money around for pleasure. And should he miss it, things become disorganized. I turned around and started. In messy how? Brad looked at me for a long time. "You have heard about the hedge fund man who vanished last year?" You nodded. "Surely. A billionaire sum?" His name was... Doesn't matter. Point of view is he owed Damon money. One day, he is sailing his boat in the Hamptons. Following day? Absent. Not body, not news, simply went. Damon manages things in this way. A frigid sensation passed through me. I had been thinking in little steps. Little retribution. Ruins a wedding, credit freezing, seeing his breakdown. However, this is what this exceeded my own, and Philip was clueless about his future. Philip was pulling apart. At last, he had realized I was gone. From carelessly glancing at his watch, he had entered full-fledged terror. "She left, what do you mean?" Rising in voice, he shot at the wedding coordinator. The wretched lady had the impression of wanting to vanish. "She left, sir." Why is unclear to me. "She left your sister the flowers and she said farewell to what with Amara." He turned then and really stared. Amara stood there still carrying my wedding bouquet. Her face was a terrible shade of crimson, her hands trembling. "Just what the devil did you say to her?" Philip pleaded. Amara's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Because she was knowledgeable. She did this. She had exerted too much effort. Had yearned most desperately to be the most significant lady in his life. And he had nothing now thanks to her. His phone chimed at that moment. From his building concierge, a text. "Philip, your lease seems to be problematic. Please get right on contact management." Still another. "Portia Financial Services sorry to notify you your account has been closed for non-payment. You are having your car taken back." His stomach slumped. Something very obviously went wrong. Finally, another book. This one from among the numbers he was unfamiliar with. "Russell would want to see you." His hand started to become clammy now. Since it was the book he might have killed with, the phone rang once more for Brad. He fixed his gaze on the television, lips drawn thin. "Let me make an estimate here." "Damon here?" Brad let out a breath. "Surely." I have to reply as well. He pushed the button and turned it on speaker. "Damon here." Brad answered fluidly. The vehicle filled with a deep, gravelly voice. "I know you have been using my money for gaming play." I went totally still. Brad gave me a look saying not to talk. "Damon is." "This is not about me," Brad answered coolly. "Who then is it regarding?" Brad's teeth clenched. Philip. A low chuckle. The smaller rat. I had a sensation. Brad, you see, I object to folks squandering my time. And your boy Philip? He has squandered a lot of it. Brad slid forward. What actions did he take? Damon drew a slow breath. Let's imagine he persuaded me to make investments in something non-existent. A false offer, a shell firm, many thousands of dollars poured into nothing. And now he believes he may go. My stomach turned in response. This went beyond Philip mooching sugar daddies. This was theft. Brad ran a hand over his face. We are talking roughly how much? There came a stop. Damon then added, 3 millions. I started to choke on air. 1,000,000 in dollars. Thinking he could get away with it, Philip had tricked a guy like Russell out of millions. Grasping Brad's arm, I tried to keep my voice calm. What happens should Damon discover him first? Brad fixed me, then went back to the phone. Damon, just let me handle this. Damon laughed. Brad, you do not handle things. You toss money in their direction. And unfortunately, for Philip, I am not motivated by money. I am in desire of him. Click. The line collapsed. Right now, my heart was racing. Thinking I was abandoning Philip to bring financial catastrophe, I had walked away. I had not understood I was abandoning him to maybe die. Brad ran his hands over his temples. This is awful. I nodded and started to swallow fiercely. Indeed, not quite right. I next straightened. Brad, we have to first locate him. Brad blinks. Why the devil would we do that? As much as I despise him, I don't want him dead. I muttered, clutching my champagne glass so tightly, my knuckles became white. Brad groaned and leaned back into the seat. Now, where should we begin? I let out a breath, considering. I then snatched my phone and began typing. If I knew Philip, if I truly knew him, there was only one location he would go to when his universe collapsed. And I was supposed to be waiting for him when he arrived. Brad moved. Sitting on the passenger side, I stared at my phone, attempting to guess Philip's destination. The limo had been deserted. We wanted something quicker, something less likely to attract notice. Philip no longer found himself in the plaza. I knew since he contacted me. His name danced on my screen. I hesitated. I then picked up. Where the bloody devil are you? His voice sprang out, furious, angry, frenzied. Funny, I remarked. I was about to ask you the same thing. You should not play games with me. You believe I might aid you? I snapped. Following all as I knew Brad. I am acquainted with Damon. You told me a lie, Philip. Years. His breaths were not consistent. I did not lie. You just assumed I was foolish enough not to know. Quiet silence. And then, Amara addressed you, not sure she said anything. I started to chuckle. Not surprisingly, he would naturally believe his sister was the cause. I responded, You have much more issues than Amara. Brad pointed for me to call on speaker. I indeed did. Nicholas. Brad spoke softly and clearly. Damon is in need of money. Restlessness. Still then, I don't have it. Brad gave a headshake. In correct response, Philip started to fallish in voice. Tell me kindly. You are going to assist me. You are still wealthy. You can... Brad laughed and yelled out loud. Oh, you now want my assistance? What became of all that arrogant crap? What happened to Brad? Not really important. Though Philip sounded smaller, I didn't believe it was realistic. I went wrong. Brad's mouth closed tightly. Surely. You certainly did, and Damon is not quite the forgiving kind. Hello, I can help to correct this. I simply need some time. You are running out of time. I leaned in. You are where, Philip? Stillness, and then the flat. I turned to look at Brad. The lease you just canceled covers one. Brad graced his smile. I turned back to pick the phone. Remain there. We will be arriving. The doorman wouldn't let us pass when we arrived. Mr. Last Name said, stone-faced, I am no longer a resident here. Brad sent him a neat 100. We will just be 10 minutes. The doorman stood still, then nodded. We ascended via the elevator. The hall was shockingly silent when the doors opened. We then came upon him. Head in his hands, Philip was seated on the floor outside the apartment, knees down. His tie came free, his hair messy. When he noticed us, he turned to search. You did this, he told Brad. Brad yawned. You engaged in this with yourself. I folded my arms. Sit up. Philip nodded slowly. Then he went slowly. I fixed him in the eye. This was the guy I meant to wed, and currently, I did nothing for him. Have you ever loved me? I asked. He faltered. Sure I did. I lowered my head. Was that love then, when you were jetting to Ibiza with Brad or fooling Russell out of millions? His jaws closed. When you laughed at Amara's awful statement instead of standing up for me, was that love? When you paid our wedding with his money, was it love? Philip released a breath, his shoulders drooping. I wanted you not to know. See what? That you were a hoax? Not. Yes. His eyes went flare. That I lacked sufficient. I calmed down. He started to swallow. I saw men like Brad growing up, just like Damon did. These strong guys had everything they needed, and I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be the guy able to gift you the earth. I looked at him, wondering if it was meant to be a justification. I said at last, not love. That exhibits vanity. His face creased. I had meant to inform you. I was supposed to straighten things after the wedding. Brad grinned. You believed Damon would let you go? Philip's hands came together in fists. I wonder what I should do. I shucked my head. These days it is not my concern. Then I turned to Brad. Come on. I turned around, not looking back. Philip gave a call. Blocked. Blaming me for wrecking her brother's life, Amara sent 3 pages I answered with a single line. See yourself as the most significant lady in his life. Blocked. Damon turned around and saw Philip. After that, I'm not sure what occurred. However, I know Philip departed the city overnight. Disappeared, gone. I stayed silent about asking inquiries. Brad and me here? We maintained correspondence. As it happens, we are really good business partners. Who would have known? And me? I left without paying. None of a wedding, not dishonest, none Philip. Only myself, a glass of champagne, and the rest of my life waiting. And to be honest, I has never felt lighter.